Spider-Man 3 wasn't originally supposed to be the conclusion to Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, but it was, and we just watched it. I'd seen it before, but once again, as usual, Brienne had not. But we've actually been knocking all these out. We actually knocked out all 3 movies in 3 consecutive days. Spider-Man 1 was 2 days ago, Spider-Man 2 was yesterday, and today we knocked out Spider-Man 3 to kick off the new year. I don't know whenever you're seeing this video, but today we're filming this on January 1st, 2021.
Yes.
Brienne, what did you think about Spider-Man 3?
Yeah, I liked it. I went in, because you had told me that this isn't, like, most people's favorite, so I went in kind of skeptical about it. It was better than what I expected, based off of what you said. It definitely does not top the other 2, but it was not a bad movie. I've seen other superhero movies that I think were lower than that, like, would be ranked lower. So, yeah, it was surprisingly good, but still was not my favorite. Like, it didn't top the second one.
Yeah, that's actually really funny because I tried really hard to go out of my way to not give you an impression about the movie going in.
Yeah.
So, I'm actually kind of surprised that you picked up on the fact that I don't care for this movie a whole lot, and that the general consensus is that the public doesn't care for this movie.
Yeah.
Because I actually tried really hard. Like, I did tell her ahead of time that Spider-Man 2 is considered one of the better movies. Really, Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2 are considered some of the better superhero movies in general. Whereas I went out of my way to try to just not say anything about Spider-Man 3, which in and of itself should probably give away that it's not received as well, but I was hoping you would just think it was considered an average movie. But I guess somewhere in there it kind of slipped out that, like, man, that kind of bumps me out, because I really tried to hide that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was, like, it is a likable movie. I will say that, and I think I mentioned in previous videos that growing up, I mean, this is 2007, I was 10 years old when this movie came out. It was 13 years ago. Now, approaching 14, right? 2021. But I was 10 years old when this movie came out. I remember my dad and I going to see this movie, and I remember leaving the theater thinking it was the best thing ever. But at the time, if there was anything that had, like, cool colors and superheroes and action, I thought it was awesome.
You're all about it.
Yeah, and at the time, you know, I wasn't looking at CGI. I wasn't looking at story arcs. I wasn't looking at characterization. I was like, Spider-Man! And, like, you know, it was cool. So I remember loving it. Ever since then, this is the movie that, for some reason, I don't know why, I do revisit most often in the trilogy. Mainly because I think the nostalgia, it's my... Even though it is probably my least favorite when it comes to appreciating it as a film, it's my favorite to just go back and rewatch, because I think there's a lot of just moments in there that I find really entertaining.
Yeah.
But overall, I'll say, I mean, you said you liked the movie, so we'll see about this, but overall, watching the movie, I was having a tough time finding anything to actually praise about the movie. I don't know about that. Like whenever I was watching it, basically I was holding it up to the level that we've compared the first 2. Right? We're talking about character arcs, we're talking about characterization, we're talking about how there's fleshed out themes in the movies. I didn't see a lot of that in this movie. So you'd agree with that? Yeah, it was just one of those things where it's a very likable movie. I enjoy it just to sit down and watch it, but it just doesn't meet the standard of the first 2 Spider-Man movies, you know? Because you do have a lot of villains, which is kind of cool, but at the same time, we've talked about how one of the positives of the first 2 movies is that there were less characters that allowed them to flesh them out more.
Right.
Whereas here, you really, I guess, have 3 main villains, right? You've got Harry, you know, Peter's best friend, who ends up kind of becoming the second Green Goblin. I think in the comics he's called, like, the Hobgoblin or something like that. I don't know. I didn't look this up ahead of time. And then you have the Sandman. And then you have Venom. Which, I will say, I was surprised. Whenever Venom showed up, she was like, isn't that guy's name Venom? And I was like, whoa, how did you actually know? Like, you were familiar with the character Venom somehow. How was that? Do you know?
I think just because my family's, like, big Disney fans, I think it might have just, like, come across at one point. Maybe my dad had said it or something like that, or maybe I had seen it in merchandise or something like that. I've just heard his name before. I've never seen any type of movie or comic or anything about it. I just think I saw his face and his name associated with it somewhere, someplace. I couldn't tell you where. It was just kind of one of those things that are, like, embedded in the back of your brain. Yeah. And you're like, hey, is this so-and-so? And, yeah. It just happened to be correct. I don't really know how.
Cool.
But it did.
Yeah, I just thought that was funny because most of these things, like, there were some people where she, like when we've been watching these Marvel movies, there are characters who are just very famous and popular characters that she did not know who they were. Whereas Venom shows up, she's like, oh, that's Venom. And I was like, wow, that was surprising to me. I guess there was a Venom movie that came out a few years ago that's actually unrelated to this series at all. So it could be something that has to do with that. I don't really know, but I just thought that was actually kind of funny. Yeah. But before I sit down and kind of just roast this movie a little bit, what were some of the things that you liked about the movie? Because you said that you liked the movie, and I don't want to detract from that. So what did you like about it?
I think it was just kind of one of those things where it was like a likable movie. Like I could see myself like turning it on in the background and being something you could just like mindlessly have on, So it's like one of those movies I would revisit and I would rewatch again. But there's nothing that I grasp onto like I did in the first two, if that makes sense. So I like the movie in the sense that it's a likable movie, if that makes sense. It's just something that's like, oh yeah, I could watch that. It's not bad, but it's not great either. So
yeah. The other two movies, I guess, maybe this is what you're going for, I don't know. The other two movies, if I'm going to sit down and rewatch those, I'm rewatching them because they're great movies.
Yeah, like I'm going to sit down and devote my time to it and my attention.
Yeah. Whereas this movie, if I'm going to sit down and rewatch it, it's more like I'm just, wanting some mindless entertainment.
Yes. That's
kind of fun, kind of entertaining. It's definitely more comic booky than the other ones, because the other ones did have comic book stuff. But really, the main comic booky elements of it, which I don't even know how to define comic booky, but I think you hear that term and you know what I mean. Yeah. The main comic booky elements were like J. Jonah Jameson. Right, like the editor, where he's like, Spider-Man, and like all this stuff, like that's comic booky. The rest of the movies, like in Spider-Man 1 and 2, they're just really good, like action dramas, with like little comedy pieces, like comedic, like bits laced in there, but they're mainly like character arcs, and like they're character-driven stories that are really just good films in general. This movie, the things it has going for it are just a lot of really kind of hilarious and outrageous segments that are kind of like, they're cool for the eyes, and they're kind of funny to watch, but when it comes to actually like a compelling story arc,
right,
I don't know if I would really say that there's anything there that's super compelling. I mean, the one compelling thing is Harry's resolution, where basically you've had this character arc for Harry Osborn. From the first movie, he starts off as Peter's best friend, and at the end of the movie, his dad dies, and at the end of and he knows that he dislikes Spider-Man because he thinks Spider-Man killed his dad, and then at the end of the second movie, he figures out that Peter is Spider-Man, and that culminates in the third movie to where you actually have him turning into a villain for a little bit, and then he loses his memory, he gets his memory back, becomes a villain again, but then he ultimately has this redemption arc. And so that is the one cool thing where that's actually, we see the conclusion of that character arc. And so I did like that. Like, I actually do enjoy that part. I know a lot of people, sometimes they have their complaints about that, but the only complaints I can even think of with Harry's thing in this movie is just the CG and some of the stuff, because the CGI in this movie is not nearly as good. Like, in Spider-Man 2, you were praising, like, the CGI when it comes to Doc Ock's tentacles and stuff like that. In this one, there's just so many things where I'm just looking at it.
Yeah, it's very obvious.
Yeah, and I think it's just because they were going, it's like the third movie, and I think maybe it was originally supposed to be like a trilogy, but then it was doing well, so they started planning a fourth one, but then they ended up backtracking and they started over again a little bit. So I don't know if this was originally planning on being like the final story.
Right.
So maybe they were trying to go out with a bang, but you can see that they tried to do a lot bigger things. And as a result, the CGI kind of suffered for it, because you just look at it, you're like, oh. Like, there's places where it starts off where you can tell these are real people, and then over the course of the scene, you're like, oh, this is just reverted to a cartoon. Yeah. It's kind of like things we talked about in Black Panther, in Wonder Woman 1984. And really, I mean, in many ways, I would say this movie is comparable to Wonder Woman 1984. Mainly because, like what you were saying, it's a movie where it's got entertaining plot points. It's got things you want to see, but I don't think you're going to sit down and just rewatch it because you're like wanting to devote time to it. Yeah. I think that's the same case with Wonder Woman 1984. I enjoyed the movie, but in all honesty, it's not a great movie. Yeah. It's enjoyable. It's like, okay, cool, that was fun. I don't see myself sitting down and like dissecting it anytime in the future. Watch, like one day I'm just going to sit down and be like, hey guys, let's talk about Wonder Woman 1984 scene by scene. I don't see that happening, but I kind of lumped it together with that. But what did you think about all the different villains? What did you think about Sandman in this movie?
I think, well, just to say like villains overall, I didn't like that there was, like, numerous ones.
Mm-hmm.
I think I mentioned it maybe in one of the last 2 videos. I really like when there's only one villain, and that's kind of, like, what the last 2 gave me. And especially even if I compare it to other Marvel movies and things like that, I really just don't like whenever there's, like, numerous bad guys. I like it when it's just one, like, almost just one-on-one. Like, it just makes a lot more sense. It's simplistic. But it's, you know, it's just easy to flesh out both characters. But there's so, like, many villains, and there's, like, so many things going on. It's not my cup of tea. Which, again, reminded me of Wonder Woman 1984. Because there was, like, numerous
people.
Bad
Maxwell
people.
Lord, Cheetah.
Yeah, so there's all kind of things going on. But I really like when it's just one.
Mm-hmm.
But Sandman, I think the idea could have been cool. But I think the fact that they're, like, in a city, there's just, like, these, like, random patches of sand every once in a while, which I guess isn't very practical, but, I mean, the idea itself was kind of interesting, but not the strongest villain I've seen.
What'd you think about him being the actual killer of Peter's uncle?
I thought that kind of redeemed it a little bit. That made it more interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was actually... I think whenever I first saw the movie, even as a kid, that was one thing I didn't like, which is interesting because I think rewatching it now, it actually works better. Mainly because, I know that's something that a lot of people also, they don't like that. Like, they're like, oh, like, it kind of takes away the whole punch of Peter kind of killing the person in the first movie. But I actually kind of like that. I think maybe because whenever I was rewatching Spider-Man 1 and 2 this time, I knew what was coming with Spider-Man 3.
Right.
And I knew, like, so I was actually looking at it through those lenses, and I thought it actually emphasized the themes, because, you know, in Spider-Man 1, it was responsibility. Spider-Man 2, it seems to be more about choice. And then whenever you get to Spider-Man 3, you have this revelation that, basically, this other guy killed Uncle Ben.
Right.
And so we almost have those 2 themes from the first 2 movies coming to a head, because now Peter has to decide, am I going to make the same choice in killing this guy? And what we see is that Peter, he's not doing very good in this movie, honestly. Like, he has more of the things that he desires, but he's kind of just, like, gotten really arrogant for the first, like, half of this movie. And then he ends up getting, like, the symbiote. You know, he has the black suit and stuff.
Right.
And he ends up going after Sandman, trying to kill him. He thinks he does. And then it kind of just turns out, lucky him, he didn't commit murder. The guy is still alive, and then they get to, you know, he gets to give him his forgiveness at the end of the movie. But that was actually one thing where I was like, okay, there was a little bit of a continuation of a theme there. And whenever you watch all the movies back to back, I think it actually works that you have somebody else killing Uncle Ben. Because then, really, it should probably just make Peter feel even guiltier about the fact that he essentially killed that other guy. Because he was doing it out of vengeance, but then it shows, wow, you know, vengeance doesn't pay off, because maybe the choice to kill somebody belongs not to us. You know what I mean? So it's like, you thought you knew all the things, and so you made this drastic choice to, I mean, he didn't push the guy out the window in Spider-Man 1, right? He did not murder this guy, but he was probably going to, and then the guy happened to trip and fall to his death, and then Spider-Man was like, yeah. But he was kind of making these big calls because he was in the heat of the moment. He was like, he was acting on vengeance, right? And so I actually thought it was kind of cool that he had to realize, oh, wow, I thought I knew the whole story and I didn't. And I think that should be like a sobering wake-up call for us. Like, whenever you're wanting to make a big decision, hey, make sure you know the full story here. And so I thought that was kind of cool. So I actually did like Sandman going, like, that was another good thing I took out of this movie, and that's why I asked about him, because I actually appreciated that story a lot more this time than I have in previous watches, because, like I said, in previous watches, I haven't been watching all of them through. I've mainly just been watching Spider-Man 3. But then, another thing I wanted to ask you about, I'm going to try to keep this brief, but one thing I have to ask you about, because I don't think that we can even talk about this movie without mentioning it, and anybody watching this video, if you've made it this far, you know what I'm about to ask about. What do you think about emo Peter Parker?
Oh, yeah. It fits the part for the idea of the plot. I see what they were going for. Like, I understand, like, you know, the black suit and all that. Like, I see, like, they're trying to differentiate, but I thought it was kind of weird. Yeah. I think it was a little bit of, like, a stretch. Like, I feel like they almost were kind of running out of ideas or something like that. Like, okay, like, what can we do? Like, yeah, let's straighten his hair and, like, grease it down onto his forehead and, like, make him look, edgy.
Yeah, it always cracks me up whenever you see movies and they're trying to display that somebody has become evil.
Yeah.
And, we've seen that Tobey Maguire's a good actor, right? We've seen that. Like, have you seen the faces he makes? He makes some face. Like, this guy can act with emotion, right? So I'm surprised that they went to these drastic measures to display that he's kind of gone bad. Mm-hmm. Because in previous movies, like Spider-Man 1, Spider-Man 2, you have these villains who, they're, like, literally Willem Dafoe, when he's talking to the mirror, he's going back and forth, like, good, evil, and you can tell.
Yeah.
Right? In Spider-Man 2, you have Doc Ock, and he's kind of talking to himself, and you see the good and the evil playing back and forth. I'm surprised they didn't just do that with Peter.
Yeah, because he'd be capable of doing that.
Tobey Maguire, he's a good actor. He could do that. But instead, they decided to just, like, straighten his hair. Right? Like, and then, like, just, like, give him, give him the bangs, grease it down, and, like, I think he put on a little bit of weight. Either that or he's just wearing clothes that are too tight on him. And he's just, like, walking through, and he's just, like... And, like, they got, like, this music playing, and he's, like, checking out girls, and they're, like, obviously disgusted at him, and he's just acting like this total pig. And I get it, because they basically said that the symbiote, it basically enhances person's, like, character qualities, especially their aggression, and throughout the movie, Peter Parker, he's been arrogant, and so it's enhancing his arrogance and making him more aggressive in that arrogance. So I'm like, okay, I get where they're coming from, but dang, it's just, like, even, like, I knew it was coming, because anytime I think of Spider-Man 3, I don't think of Sandman, I don't think of Harry Osborn going bad, I don't think of Venom, I don't think of anything except for emo Peter Parker dancing through the streets, being like, and then, like, him at the dance bar, and he's like, dig on this.
Yeah.
And, like, that's all I can think of when I think about this movie. And I can tell you that, hands down, is the reason why I rewatched this movie. Because it's hilarious. And after we finish filming these videos, we're going to go back in the living room, and I'm going to show you these amazing memes that have been created. I think they're called, like, Bully Parker. You can go find them on YouTube. They're hilarious. And basically, they just edit him, like, those scenes into other movies.
Yeah.
And it's just like they'll edit them into Avengers movies, into Infinity War, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he'll just either save the day or he'll be the villain or something. And it's just, it's hilarious. And so when I think of this movie, that's what I think of, because it's so outrageous. And going back into this, like I said, it's been a while since I've seen these movies. It's been the least amount of time since I've seen this one. Like, I've probably rewatched this one more frequently than the others. But it's still been a while. And I was expecting, looking at it through a little bit older eyes, I was expecting it to have a smoother transition. Like, I thought it would be explained more, like, why he is suddenly just, like, this.
Yeah.
But then it just, like, cuts. Like, I think it's... What was it? I think it was literally... Him and Harry were fighting in, like, Harry's, like, penthouse. Right? And then he, like, throws the... Like, he throws, like, the little bomb thing, and it, like, explodes. And then it just cuts to him, like, dancing down the street. And, like,
you're like, how?
You're like, oh my gosh. Like, he just, like, the whole point is that, oh gosh, he's gone full dark, right? Like, he's bad. But I'm like, like, it's so cringy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how did we get to this from Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2? Like, as a kid, I was like, oh, this is great, this is funny.
Yeah.
Like, and probably as a kid, I was like, that guy is bad. Because maybe that's the thing. As I'm talking about this, I think I'm realizing the difference. I think the first two movies are a lot more mature. Yeah. And the third movie is more of a kid movie. Right? It's more openly family. It's like a more family movie. So there's less jump scares. Right? There's maybe like one or two. Whereas the first two, there's some very horror elements.
Yeah.
This one has more, like, it's more comic booky. They're less subtle with stuff. I think that's what it is. I think, like, as I'm talking about it, it's almost like it just changed genres. The first two, they didn't just, like, hammer you over the head with stuff. There were, like, these deep themes, and it was character-driven, and there was a lot of that type of stuff. This movie, they're trying to make it to where a kid can go in there, and they can get the point as well.
Right.
Right? So an adult is looking and being like, oh, this is kind of lame. Whereas a kid, they're not going to get it. Like, you need to put the hair down. You need to have him acting like a total pig in order for them to grasp it, right? So maybe... I think it's clicking now. I think that's probably what happened, is they wanted to market this more towards a younger audience. And that could make sense. Maybe I'm just giving them too much credit, and they just totally lost sight of where they were going. But I'd like to think that... I'd like to think that that's what they were doing, and that would also explain why they added more villains, because you can sell more action figures that way. right? The more villains you have, the more suits you have. You can have red, blue suit Spider-Man, black suit Spider-Man, which I will say, when I saw black suit Spider-Man for the first time, I thought that was slick. I was like, that's legit. I mean, like, I thought that was so cool. But, it makes sense. I think maybe they were marketing it towards a younger audience, and so that's how I'm going to, in my head, justify it being a not very good movie. But that all being said, I just had to rant about emo Peter Parker there because it just cracks me up, and there's been like all these videos I've wanted to show you and stuff, like the Bully Parker memes and stuff like that. But I'm trying to be cautious in what I show her because I don't want to spoil these movies ahead of time, right? I know that y'all got mad at me about me showing her Avengers Endgame and stuff. I didn't mind that as much. Right? But there's certain things where I do want to respectfully, like, show her these things and not spoil everything for her, right? Endgame, it was like she hadn't seen any Marvel movies, so how was I going to just, like, avoid that? I was like, I just got to show her the last one and just see what she thinks, because that was funny. No, but I'm trying to, like, I've been wanting to show you these memes, but I had to wait, because I'm like, nah, I can't show her that, because she won't understand it. But now that you've seen Spider-Man 3, now I can open you up to all these brand new memes.
Yes.
And that's basically my goal when it comes to showing her these movies. I need to show you the movies so that you can understand the memes that come from the movies. That's what I need. I need you to understand that. That is crucial. But do you have anything else that you were just eager to say about this movie?
I will say in the last two movies, I really liked Peter Parker and MJ's relationship. But in this one, I just wasn't feeling it as much. I also think I just didn't really like MJ as much in this movie. And like her characterization and stuff. I didn't really care for her as much in this movie. So that probably is what influenced it. But yeah, I didn't like their relationship as much in this one.
Yeah, there was a drastic change there, for sure. I mean, I think we've talked about this in past videos. I think MJ is a little bit more self-centered.
Yeah.
Just naturally, it seems like. But in this movie, it's like enhanced, like so much more. But to her credit, Peter is also a lot more self-centered in this movie as well at the beginning. To where, I mean, it seems like he's just kind of almost oblivious, because I don't think he's like intentionally being self-centered. It just seems like he's finally achieved everything he wants, and he's like, yeah, I got the, like, he still thinks about her all the time, and he's like got all these great plans, but he's also just so caught up on like himself, and he's just like, oh wow, I'm finally a big deal, this is awesome. To where he's just kind of oblivious to where he does things, and you're like, dude, you can't do that. Like, you can't be kissing another girl. Like, honestly, like, because he, like, lets Gwen Stacy, he lets Gwen Stacy kiss him while he's, like, hanging upside down. And, like, MJ's standing there, like, first off, don't do it in private, but definitely don't do it in public.
Yeah.
Like, the girl that you're wanting to propose to is right there, and you're, like, replicating y'all's kiss in front of her.
Their thing,
yeah. I'm like, dude, you can't do that. But, like, he just seems totally confused. Like, he doesn't even think it needs to be brought up. He's like, nah, she's, and then, like, it turns out they're friends, and they're lab partners, and, like, I'm like, okay, like, I got where Mary Jane was coming from, but prior to that, like, just at the beginning of the movie, I get what you're talking about, like, at the very beginning of the movie,
she's very, like, whiny.
Yeah, like, she's like, this is about me.
Yeah.
Like, and then, like, he even comes to her play, and he's like, you did great, and she's like, tell me again how awesome I did. Yeah. Did they all love it? How loud did they applause? And, like, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, jeez, like, is this just what it's like to be, like, a popular girl who everybody just always shows attention to? Because that would just be draining, like, jeez. So I do agree with that. But by the end, since they were both jerks to each other, so in the end I was like, okay, I was fine. Where the final scene was like him coming up to her and, like, grabbing her hand and stuff. I was like, okay, like, we're fine. At least he ultimately did get the girl in the end, and the way the movie ends, that's the end of our trilogy. There are no more movies after this, so you start off the movie, he can't even talk to the trilogy. You start off the trilogy, he can't even talk to the girl. By the third movie, not only has he dated her and been planning on proposing to her and broken up with her, but he got her back again. And that's it. So I do agree, though. And I was not feeling it as much in this movie. They had better chemistry in the first two movies as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, like from the first movie, like whenever they're just like talking to each other out in the backyard, like across the fence, like, dang, I was just like, man, I'm feeling that chemistry. That's good. That's really good. Whereas in this movie, it just felt more awkward. Like, I think narratively, it's just easier to write conflict. I think I've seen that just in a lot of movies in general. Like, whenever, like, that's why the will they, won't they thing works a lot better in TV shows and stuff, because once people actually get together, it gets kind of boring.
Right.
And so I think that's why, especially at the beginning of this movie, we're like, oh, I don't like this, because it's hard to write people just being like happy because you're happy, and like that's not as intriguing, sadly.
Yeah.
So like you start liking it more and more once like there's more conflict and stuff. But then she goes and kisses Harry and stuff. You're like, but then you're like, oh well, Peter already kissed Gwen. At this point, I'm just...
It just goes back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, but before we wrap this up, if you were going to rank these 3 movies, how would you rank them?
The second one, the first one, the third one.
Second one being the best?
Yes. Yeah.
All right,
second one being the best, the first one being in the middle, but those are really close. Mm-hmm. Those were like neck and neck for me, so I mean, I feel like they could almost like switch depending on just like which one I'm feeling more. Mm-hmm. But as of now, second one first, then the first one, and then the third one.
Mm-hmm. And I would honestly, like, to go along with what you were saying, going into this, I told you that most people would say the second one is one of the better of all superhero movies in general. I'd say rewatching these, I would almost rank the first one above the second one. Because going into it, I was thinking, oh yeah, the second one, it's amazing, which it is. It's very good. But I think a lot of my opinion had been kind of formed by just listening to other people's opinions, you know? Because like I said, I hadn't seen it in a long time. But rewatching it, man, I just, like, the first movie, it's just like, it's a classic. Just like the way it introduces all the characters and stuff, I just loved it. I was like, wow, this is a really good introduction to Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And so that was really cool. And now I guess we'll have to show you the Amazing Spider-Man movies, which they only got 2 of those movies. They were probably planning on doing more of those as well. But there were different circumstances that resulted in eventually us getting Tom Holland in the Marvel movies as Spider-Man. But we'll get to those eventually. But there you go. So you rank them 2, 1, 3. And I agree with you, because they're very close.
I feel like the first and the second one both like complement each other too, especially how we were talking about the themes. If you didn't have the first one, the second one wouldn't make that much sense. But then the second one kind of finishes off the theme of the first one. Yeah. So I feel like they're almost even, but like you
they're
can't.
Like cohesive.
But there's 3 movies, so you can't really make them like even. It'd be different if you had like a huge selection of movies and you'd be like, okay, tied for first, but there's only 3, so I feel obligated to put just one in first place. But I feel like they're so interchangeable. Yeah. Because they complement each other so well. I feel like you need both. So they almost feel like they need to be on the same level. But
yeah, I don't know. Because it's like, they really are pretty close. And I think the reason why I enjoyed the first one more this time isn't because it was necessarily a better movie. It's because I was expecting it to not be as good as the second. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, the reason why it was my favorite this time through is because I'm like, wow, this is a way better movie than I remembered. Right. And so, like I remembered, like, going into these, I remembered key scenes from all the movies. It turns out a majority of the scenes I remembered were from the first movie. Yeah. I thought a majority would be from the second, but then as we were watching the first movie, I was like, dang, I'm remembering, like, all of these scenes. Wow, they were, like, all, like, classic things to me. So, I don't know, that's hard. The first 2 movies, they're very close to me. And I think I checked on IMDb, and they are rated the exact same. Really? I think they're both like 7.3. And then this one's like 6.3 or something. Yeah. But yeah, so there are our thoughts about Spider-Man 3. Yeah. And do you have anything else you wanted to say about that movie? Or anything else about the trilogy in general?
No, I think
no? Okay. Whenever you're comparing this Spider-Man to Tom Holland's Spider-Man, what do you think about them?
I think I like these ones better. Yeah? Yeah. The other one was good. Tom Holland's cool, but I'm also someone who's very partial to things that are like the originals of everything, like the classics. So I think part of me likes.
If you want, I can take you back to the original. Like, there was like a Spider-Man TV series.
Oh, really?
I think a long time ago. I think it was only like a season long, or even if that. But it's rough. Really? So if you want the originals, we can go back to that, and we'll see if you like them then. Okay, cool. Well, there are our thoughts about Spider-Man 1, 2, and 3. We'll be back eventually. I don't know when. I'm not saying this is anytime soon, so don't get your hopes up. Eventually, we'll be back with Amazing Spider-Man, those movies, and yeah. So until then, I'm David.
And I'm Brienne.
And this is Now Let's Be Honest About Movies.